During one basketball game between the Wolves and the Stalkers, the Wolves are losing in high school. With only 44 seconds left, the coach tells Dean to get the ball and pass it to Mason to get the few points they need to win. The boys follow this strategy and soon Mason gets 2 points, although he's distracted when he sees a burned man in the crowd. The game goes on and Dean passes the ball to Mason again. He hurls it at the last second and looks in horror at the burned man appearing in front of him, reaching out with its black hand. At that point, the ball receives the last points and the Wolves win. So Mason is surrounded by his overjoyed team. A terrified Mason runs to the changing room and notices the goosebumps on his arm when he opens his locker. He throws out a bunch of things until only a strange artifact is left. While a voice whispers his name, Mason goes in search of a weight. At that point, the burned man enters the room and Mason begs for more time before he throws the weight on the artifact, smashing it into pieces. Then he looks at the door and is relieved to see his teammates coming in. Later on in the shower, Mason hears a noise and looks down to see black smoke under his feet. When he turns around, the burned man grabs him by the neck and puts a hand down his throat to set Mason on fire. When his teammates hear the screaming, they rush to the shower and find Mason burning to death. 6 months later, Chris moves to her cousin's house. She's doing some sketching on the windowsill when she suddenly zones out, staring at the ground with dark thoughts almost sneaking in. Thankfully, she's snapped out of it by her cousin, Ree, who offers to help her unpack. At school, Ree shows Chris around and she shares a look with a girl named Ellie. Chris is assigned a locker that says horse, so Ree explains that it used to be Mason's nickname. Suddenly, Dean and his teammates surround Chris, telling her that she shouldn't use that locker out of respect. His girlfriend, Grace, cuts in to point out that this school is very old, so all the lockers belong to dead people. While Ree doesn't flirt with Grace, Dean knows that Chris is the new girl and comments that he hears rumors that she got out of rehab after killing her dad. He's interrupted by Ellie, who calls him out for his cruelty. Dean continues to make fun of Chris, who kicks him in the groin. Mr. Craven decides to give Chris, Dean, Grace, and Ree detention for causing a disturbance in the hallway. When Ellie tries to defend Chris, she is also given detention. Then Ellie attempts to befriend Chris, who tells her she doesn't need her help. After Ellie walks away, Chris opens the locker to find it full of Mason's things, including the mysterious artifact. Hearing some whispers, Chris decides to open it and finds a strange whistle. When she's about to blow it, the bell rings and she goes to class. In the afternoon, Chris arrives late for detention. When she puts down her bag on the desk, the artifact and the whistle roll out. Dean thinks it's a pipe and tells Craven, who takes a closer look at the whistle. He says it's some sort of musical instrument and identifies the text carved on its base as Mayan. Craven reads the symbols and Grace types them on a translation website to discover they mean summon the dead. Interested in finding out the historical value, Craven announces he's keeping the whistle, pointing out that Chris found it in a school property locker. He also lets all the teens go home early, but they have to write an essay on ancient Mesoamerica to make up for it. After the kids leave, Craven goes online to search for antiques and confirms they're very expensive. He's about to sell the whistle when he hears whispers of his name, convincing him to blow it. Craven does exactly that and the window cracks. The act makes him too upset and he puts down the whistle and confirms the sale on the website before leaving the classroom. Outside, Grace invites everyone to a meetup later. After the others leave, Ree tells Chris that what happened to her father wasn't her fault, but she doesn't want to talk about it. At that point, realizes that he forgot something and runs back to the classroom. He finds Craven's laptop still open with the website displaying the antique prices, which gives him an idea. Meanwhile, Chris is approached by Noah, who describes himself as a youth pastor. He invites her to church as he tries to sell her happy powder, even offering a welcome sample. At that point, Ree returns and attempts to shove Noah away from his cousin, but Noah easily overpowers him and throws him on top of a car before pulling out a knife. After discussing God and assuring Chris that he'll always be there if she needs him, he leaves. Ree explains that Noah sells illegal substances to the kids who go to his church, and a year ago, a child overdosed and died. In the evening, Craven realizes that the artifact is empty. He searches for the whistle everywhere in vain. Then he hears a noise and thinks it is the janitor, but when he steps into the corridor, he sees a strange figure standing in the darkness. Suddenly, Craven is startled by a hand on his shoulder. However, it's just the janitor. The mysterious figure disappears, so Craven thinks he's been imagining things. He then goes back to the classroom and sees that he can see his breath. When he turns around, he sees a creepy creature with weird goo coming out of its mouth. This creep stabs Craven with both hands to squeeze his lungs until he dies. The janitor walks by the door, but doesn't see anything. The same goo appears in Craven's mouth as he turns into the creature before he collapses. At Grace's house, Reveal steals the whistle. Chris refuses to mingle with the group, but can't stop staring at Ellie, who injects her leg with her diabetes medicine. Grace's brother, Timmy, attempts to spy on their party, but she sends him to his room. When Chris announces she's leaving, Ellie tries to talk her out of it. At that point, Dean dares Grace to blow the whistle. When she does so, everyone covers their ears because a painful noise is heard for a few seconds. Once it's over, Dean tells everyone to be quiet because he can hear something else, but this is just an excuse to fart. Chris then leaves. So, Ellie follows her to invite her to the Harvest Festival, saying that it would be really nice if she came. After Chris says yes, Ellie goes away. Then, Chris asks Ree whether Ellie likes boys or girls, but Ree has no idea. At home, Chris continues to try and think of something to text Ellie, but she isn't happy with any of her ideas. Suddenly, she sees someone standing in the tree outside her window and gets very afraid, only to be startled by ringing the room. When she looks at the tree again, the figure is gone. At that point, her phone pings with a text from Ellie and Chris panics because she realizes she accidentally sent a flirty text. It seems Ellie liked it though, so rails the phone and sends a cute reply to help his cousin. After Dean also leaves, Grace begins to work on her essay. She continues to hear noises and someone whispering her name, but she thinks it's Timmy playing tricks on her. When she sees the light in her brother's room go out, she realizes that he isn't making the noises around her. Suddenly, a creepy creature runs behind her and she hears her name whispered again. She follows the noise and looks behind the furniture, but there's nothing. At the moment, a creepy hand touches her and she turns around and sees Timmy. Grace notices he's too far to be the one who touched her. The next morning, the principal calls the students to an assembly and tells them of Craven's death, stating that it was lung cancer. Ellie sees a girl in front of her shaking and her neck suddenly breaks. This girl then turns her head back to reveal her creepy face, whispering Ellie's name. At this point, Grace hands the whistle to Chris and the distraction snaps Ellie out of it. Now the creepy girl is gone. After class, Ellie and Chris go to Mason's house because they believe the family will want his whistle. They knock on the door and find it open. The girls go inside and listen to old music while they notice all the antiques that decorate the house. Suddenly, Mason's grandmother, Ivy, appears behind them and without saying hello goes on a rant about the bank taking the house from her. She explains she traveled all over the world to collect her antiques and studied the way different cultures interact with death. On a table, there are lots of medicine bottles. When Chris attempts to give her the whistle and says that she found it in Mason's locker, Ivy responds that actually it found her like it found Mason and herself. Many years ago, Ivy obtained the whistle in a back alley in Guatemala. Since then, it's killed her daughter, her son-in-law, her grandson. The exact translation of the markings is call your death. When a person is born, so is his death, and everyone's death comes at his appointed time. However, if someone hears the whistle, their death comes early and puts their bodies in the state of their originally planned death. Ivy returns the whistle to Chris, telling her that she should never have taken it. In the evening, the girls go to the record room of the hospital. Ellie admits Mason's death was strange as he burned down in a shower, and yet they blamed it on a gas leak. They check his file and learn that he was identified by his teeth since his body was extremely burned. At that moment, someone enters the room, so the girls have to hide behind the cabinets. Mason's papers fall and Chris manages to retrieve one of them. She reads that the bone structure of the body indicates that he was in his late 40s, which matches the whistle that Laura Ivy shared. This means that Mason was supposed to die in his 40s from a gas leak and Craven was supposed to get cancer later. The girls must warn the others, so they sneak out before the employee finds the other paper on the floor. At the Harvest Festival, everybody is in costumes. Ree finds Grace and finally tells her he likes her, but she gently turns him down and kisses his cheek before going to meet her boyfriend. Dean mocks Ree's costume and Ree has a drink to forget. When Ellie and Chris arrive, Noah attempts to bother them and calls them a slur, so Ellie kicks him in the groin. Noah pulls out his knife, but Chris steps on his hand to steal it. She then pokes his nose with it and refers to the child who overdosed. Noah says he doesn't know anything, so Chris cuts his nose before disposing of the knife. Meanwhile, Dean and Grace separate in the haunted maze where they continue to get startled by employees in costumes. Dean finds a wheel and spins it to get a result that says, "You decide your fate." In one of the many corridors, Grace is shocked to see an old woman surrounded by an ethereal light. When she calls her name, Grace walks away only to find the old woman again. She immediately runs and calls Dean for help, but he thinks she's being silly about disguised employees. Suddenly, the old woman startles Grace and sends her falling, and her phone is dropped in the process. Then, Grace picks up a shovel as the woman raises her arm to point behind her, so Grace turns around and finds her again. She screams as she hits her with a shovel, which makes her collapse as well. When Grace recovers, she touches her bleeding forehead and realizes that she has the same shovel injury as the creature. Then the old woman smiles and she stands up by twisting her body. She begins to chase Grace, who runs as fast as she can. Dean is worried because she doesn't answer the phone and he goes looking for her. Grace panics when she stumbles into a dead end, but luckily she finds a secret tunnel in the wall. She begins to crawl through it, but the old woman soon joins her and holds her ankle to stab Grace's thigh with her creepy finger. Next, she puts her hand in Grace's throat and her body begins to change. After a bit of struggle, Grace manages to break free and continues moving towards the center of the maze. Unfortunately, the old woman appears on the light pole and kisses Grace to complete the transformation. Before she dies, Grace manages to pull a handle to ring the bell on the pole. By the time Dean arrives, Grace is nothing but a wrinkly old body. In the meantime, Ellie and Chris find Ryan a bear for Grace and he tells them that the others are in the maze, so they head there together. They also hear the bell and run to reunite with Dean. Afterwards, in the school gym, Dean refuses to believe that the body was Grace's. The girls share what Ivy told her and they both admit they felt death coming. Dean is still in denial, so Ree calls him out for daring Grace to blow the whistle and blames him for her death. An angry Dean pushes him down and makes fun of him for having a crush on her, causing Ree to run away. Moments later, a very drunk Dean comes through the window into his bedroom. When he looks in the mirror, he's shocked to see a man with severe bleeding injuries. He steps back and accidentally breaks his lamp, so he rushes to turn on the main light instead, only for the man to disappear. Then, his parents knock on the door, so Dean pretends he was just having a nightmare. His father scolds him for driving drunk and says it'll kill him someday. Meanwhile, at Chris' house, she tells Ellie that a year ago she overdosed. Her dad took her to the hospital in his car, but unfortunately, they were hit by a truck on the way and her dad was killed. Sometimes she feels it should have been her. Ellie comforts her before kissing her and the girls end up doing the naughty. On the roof, Ree is sitting under the rain thinking about Grace. Suddenly, he sees blood on his hands and the teddy bear, followed by a body in an industrial grinder. However, this is all his imagination. The following day, Ree and the girls go to visit Ivy, who is ill in bed. She explains that, in order to stop the curse, they have to transfer their death to someone else by marking them with their blood. As Chris looks in the mirror, she sees her death behind with a needle in her arm. As her death fades away, Ivy dies in bed. Afterwards, the three of them discuss what to do. Ree wants to pass his death, but Ellie sees it as murder and is against it. They argue about it and Ree ends up leaving alone. At home, Dean watches the news of Grace's death and turns off the TV, still in denial. Suddenly his door opens a little and a creepy hand peeks into the room. Dean throws a chair at the door. This gets the attention of his parents. He rushes to shut the door to keep them out and pushes some furniture to block the door. Then, the hangers in his closet move, and Dean's death comes out to grab his head, putting his body through the motions of a car crash. All the injuries begin to manifest in his body, breaking his bones and damaging his organ. By the time his parents manage to burst into the room, they find the dead body collapsing on the ground. Meanwhile, Chris and Ellie search for Ree in his room, but he is not around. They find pictures of him at the steel mill where he works and a comic of an anti-hero killing a bad guy, which may be a clue. Outside the church, Ree sees Noah say goodbye to the children. Once everyone is gone, Ree goes inside with a gun and shoots a vase to prove to Noah he's serious. Suddenly the church bell rings and Ree is distracted, so Noah jumps on him to try and disarm him. They fight until Ree collapses and Noah gets the gun, but when he tries to shoot, it doesn't work. Ree strikes Noah with a tray to knock him out. Later, Noah wakes up to find himself strapped to a chair in the steel mill. Ree takes the illegal substances from his pocket and forces him to swallow all of them. Then, Ree gets some blood from his own hand and pulls out the whistle and his arm gets goosebumps. When Ree is about to mark Noah, the girls arrive to stop him, but he keeps them back by pointing the gun at them. Noah begins to beg for mercy and in conjunction with the girls' pleas, it causes Ree to pull his arm back. Ree says that everyone has to die once, which gives Chris an idea. At that point, Ree begins to hear his death and his injured arm is pulled by an invisible force and he drops the gun. The girls grab him to try to save him, but it's too late. His body begins to disintegrate because he was supposed to die in the grinder. When only half his body remains, it explodes. While Noah passes out, Chris has a breakdown and Ellie has to calm her down, reminding her that she had an idea. The girls rush to Ellie's car to get her hospital supplies as Chris explains her plan. Using insulin, they were able to stop a heart and restart it with adrenaline. This would count as dying and drive their deaths away. They bring the supplies into the building where Chris sees her death waiting. Using stuff from the mill, they set up everything and lock the door. Chris wants to save Ellie first. However, Ellie surprises her by injecting insulin in her arm and she realizes that her death is portraying this exact moment. Chris' body falls into a tub of freezing water and Ellie keeps it there until the heart stops. As she dies, Chris apologizes to her family. Then Ellie pulls Chris out and injects her with adrenaline before she begins using the defibrillator. Chris almost wakes up, but her death appears in her subconscious and keeps her dead. A desperate Ellie starts to perform CPR, but death is holding on tightly to Chris. At that point, Noah wakes up and manages to escape the chair. After grabbing the gun, he begins hitting the door with a mace. Then the death of Ellie comes too, confirming that it was the girl she saw in the assembly. Noah opens a hole in the door and puts his arm into open fire, destroying the defibrillator and hurting Ellie. This doesn't prevent her from repeating the name of Chris, which gives her enough strength to finally push death away. Chris wakes up to see Ellie having a seizure on the floor while her death watches. At that point, Noah comes inside and tells everyone God has a job for everyone. He touches Ellie's blood and her death disappears. Then his own death comes and he opens fire, but every bullet hurts his body. He collapses and his death soon comes to him to kill him. Chris embraces Ellie while it's revealed that a bullet has destroyed the whistle. 3 months later, Chris thinks she sees her death sometimes, but she learns to live happily thanks to her relationship with Ellie. Meanwhile, another girl discovers the artifact in her locker. While assembling, the girl takes out the whistle and blows it. Subscribe to watch more videos like this, leave a comment about your favorite movie, and we will make it next. Thanks for watching.